What's up everyone, my name is Kelsey, welcome back to my channel. We are more than a week into 2020, so I finally got my shit together and I have my best and worst books of 2019 videos to film. I just filmed my worst books, but that's going up after this video, so keep an eye out for that. I decided to film this one second so I could end my night on a positive note. I use the word best for the sake of brevity, but these are really my most favorites. It's not objective at all. My favorites are all 4 or 5-star books, but I'm not including rereads on this list, and some of these are books in a series, so I'm just going to talk about them all together. I'm going vaguely in order of genre, and there are a lot of books on this list. I was originally going to make this one video, but once I got this list together, I was like, all right, this video will be a fucking hour long if I try to put it all in one. Starting with thrillers, because I only have 2 in this genre. I have No Exit by Taylor Adams. This follows our main character, who is driving home in Utah on winter break to visit her mom, who's in the hospital, and the storm gets really bad much quicker than expected, so she ends up stranded at this rest stop in the middle of nowhere. While she's there, she's walking around the parking lot trying to get a cell signal so she can tell her family where she is, and she sees into the back of one of the other people's trucks, and there is a kid in a cage there. So this book basically follows our main character while she's trying to figure out who the perpetrator is and how to save this kid without having any access to police or any way to get away. It is super intense and like really frightening, super fast-paced. I read this in like a day and a half. I stayed up late finishing it. I literally said, "What the fuck?" out loud several times at the end of this book, and I just loved it. If you want like a fast-paced thriller. My other thriller is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Ruth Ware is one of my favorite thriller authors, so this isn't a huge surprise, but it follows our main character who works at a daycare center and sees a job opportunity that looks a little too good to be true, but she jumps at the chance to get out of the city and try something new, and it's at this house for these very well-off, very successful, well-known architects in the middle of nowhere. Once again, just don't go to the middle of nowhere. Problem solved. Anyways, this house, I have to say, like, the main character feels like this house has a bad vibe right away. It's like an old historical house that's like half modernized, and it's a smart house with, you know, camera hookups, and everything is automated and voice controlled. And very quickly, once the parents leave, things start to get weird. Alarms are going off in the middle of the night. She thinks she can hear footsteps in the house, even though the kids are young, and she can tell in the cameras that they're asleep. Doors are unlocked when they shouldn't be, and she doesn't know what's happening. So this book follows an interesting format because we're reading it from the perspective of her writing to legal counsel from prison because one of the children is dead. So she's telling her story from the beginning in order to get help for her situation. It was really good, super thrilling. It's got that like, is something spooky going on, or is there like a bad person here? You just don't know. And I love that kind of vibe in book if you're not sure if it's paranormal or real life. Those were both 5-star reads for me. Next is nonfiction genre. And the first one I have is Becoming by Michelle Obama. This is a memoir, former, First Lady Michelle Obama. And this talks about her childhood, her teenage years, her college years, life in the White House as the First Lady. And it was super fascinating. She has like tons of words of wisdom in here. I just think Michelle Obama is like a smart, compassionate, loving woman, and I like to read from that kind of perspective. It's also super well written. I know this was written with someone, and I don't know who the ghostwriter is, but there's just some like really lovely writing in here, some like nice moments of imagery. I just really enjoyed it. 5 stars for that one. Next is The Lady from the Black Lagoon by Mallory O'Meara. This is sort of a biography, sort of a memoir, and Mallory O'Meara basically found out about Millicent Patrick, who designed the creature from the Black Lagoon. And once Mallory O'Meara found out about this, she wanted to learn more information about Millicent Patrick because there's not much available, and she went by several names in her lifetime, so everything is kind of scattered. So this is all her research about this woman and how she got started in the industry and the struggles she faced, and it's just super fascinating. And it also talks about Mallory O'Meara herself, who works in the movie industry, and there's a lot of moments of like looking at the parallels between Millicent Patrick's life and Mallory O'Meara's life. It's just really interesting, and it's not traditional biography or memoir because we're learning about both of these people, but it also goes farther back into Millicent Patrick's life and her parents and how they ended up in the US and where they got their start and how that influenced Millicent's life. I thought it was just super fascinating. I think I ended up giving this one 4 stars because the research isn't infallible and a lot of it is kind of based on more process of elimination than actual evidence. But I still enjoyed it. All right, the biggest section, science fiction and fantasy. First, Sakho Girls by Claire Legrand. This is set on an island where for the last 100 or so years, teenage girls disappear on this island and nobody knows what really happens to them, but there's a rumor that a monster takes them. And this book, set in modern day, follows 3 characters. Marion, who has just moved to the island and is new there. Zoe, who is kind of an outcast and whose friend disappeared. And Val, who is rich and popular and like old money on the island. And it just follows these 3 girls and the experiences they have together and against this monster. The writing in this book is excellent. It's very haunting. It's very eerie and like atmospheric. The characters are all interesting. All 3 of these girls are like really strong women in different ways. And I love that. We have a character that's asexual and homoromantic, and we have a female-female relationship, but the 2 girls, I don't think their sexualities are ever explicitly defined. But I love to see that in books. I especially love to see that in fantasy books. And the conclusion of this book is so intense and so good. And there are so many like great one-liners about female friendship and camaraderie and how women are like basically pitted against each other from a young age, how there's only so much space for women to be in and we have to fight each other for it, which is just not true. And I just love the way this book handled that. Next is, The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. I read this as an ebook, so I don't have a physical book. But this is an adult fantasy set in an alternate world where natural disaster can basically wipe out the entirety of humanity and everything starts from scratch. And there are these people that can sort of control the Earth's, like, it's not really Earth, that can control the planet's tectonics. But instead of being like revered and worshipped, they're outcasts and pariahs. So this book follows the perspective of 3 characters. One is a young girl who is one of these people that can control the plates, and she is taken to a training facility away from her family and friends and village in order to like serve the government basically. Our second character is a woman who works for the government and is sent on a mission to an outlying village to see what can be done in their area. And our third, I'm kind of fuzzy on the details, but our third is a mother of one of these children who turns out to have this ability, and her husband kills their child and then goes missing with their other child. So she is on a mission to hunt them down and find her child. This is just like such a unique and immense fantasy world. Like, it's masterfully done. Like, there's a reason this won so many awards. And I own the second book, so I will be continuing on with the series. But I love this book so much because of the world that it builds and because the characters that N.K. Jemisin writes are so well developed and flawed and unique. It was just an amazing book, and she's an amazing writer. Next is Wicked Saints and Ruthless Gods by Emily A. Duncan. Ruthless Gods actually comes out this year, but I won this arc, yay. And these books are sort of like a Slavic-inspired young adult fantasy where there are 2 nations at war. One is a holy nation that worships the gods. One is a heretic nation that uses blood magic, which is an insult to the gods. And these 2 countries are at war. So we follow our one character, Nadia, who is a cleric that can communicate with the gods, and she's the only one left as far as we know. We also follow Seraphim, who is the prince of the other nation, and we follow Malachiash, who is independent of these 2 nations. He's defected from the military of Seraphim's nation and finds Nadia in the forest with 2 other side characters after she escapes from an attack on her church, I guess. Is it a church? I'm a sucker for these books, and I've read a lot of negative reviews of this, but I'm really at the point where I love the character so much that like I can acknowledge the flaws and still not give a shit. These 2 books, especially the second book, it has a lot of horror elements. There's a lot of creepy imagery involving eyes and moths and just like really disturbingly written things like that. And I know this is like a politically charged book, what with the gods and the kingdoms, but like the charm of this book, the best parts of this book are the characters and their interactions and their development with each other. I also feel like out of these two books, Ruthless Gods is definitely my favorite. We get a lot more from Nadia, who is a main character, one of the 3 perspective characters in book 2, but in the first book, she just doesn't get as much attention as the other 2, as Seraphine and Malachi. And in the second book, she gets a lot more time. It's definitely, like, there's a romance between her and a character that is not a good person at all. Like, definitely a villain, but it's a villain romance, and I'm super into villain romances, but she's not exactly a great person either. Like, one of the things I like, I keep saying that. Another great thing about this book is the complexity of good versus evil. Like, none of these characters are the good guy, and neither of these nations are the good nation. Like, I can't say I want either of them to win this war, and it's such a realistic portrayal, because in so many young adult books, there's a country at war, and there's clearly the good guys and the bad guys. Clearly. But that's really not how war works. Everyone on their side always thinks they're the good guy, you know? So yeah, I love these. These are also pretty queer books. There is our main character, Seraphine. One of his bodyguards is a lesbian. One of his bodyguards is gay. And in book 2, there's a male-male relationship, and another lesbian is introduced. We can only hope it'll get more and more queer. Also, Parjahan is ace. That's not revealed into the second book, but I don't really think it's a spoiler, so. All right, next. All Systems Red and Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. These are 2 books in the novella series, The Murderbot Diaries, and they follow our main character, Murderbot, who has cracked his governor module, so there's nothing controlling his AI anymore, and he is able to make independent decisions on his own with no one able to wipe his memories or give him commands. And Murderbot is just trying to find a way to live his life and watch his soap dramas in space, you know? But he's also trying to find out some secrets from his past. So the 2 books that I've read so far, and there are more in this series that I will definitely be reading, are sort of following a long arc of Murderbot figuring out his past and trying to decide if he is an inherently bad person because of things that happened in his past. It's super fascinating, also really funny. I think Murderbot is hilarious, and I recommend this. It's a science fiction book, but I recommend it for people that are new to science fiction because it's pretty light on the technical descriptions, and it's more about artificial intelligence having humanity. Next is the Book of the Unnamed Midwife by Megan Ellison. This is an adult fantasy set in a dystopian world where a disease has wiped out much of the population, like 99% of the population, and it keeps killing people. So most of the people that have died have been women, and it specifically affects women. Well, I'll say specifically affects assigned female at birth people because it's a birth problem. Women that get pregnant and give birth, their babies die pretty much all the time, and most of the time the mother dies as well, which is clearly a problem for, population. So this book follows our main character who has figured out what is happening. I mean, not why it's happening, but she knows what is happening, and she knows the kind of shit that's going to happen just based on experience, is that men are going to try and capture women to keep them because they consider them like a precious investment. Gross. But that is a lot of what this book is about. So this woman, our main character, basically just wants to survive. She disguises herself as a man, not just wearing men's clothes, but she tries to adopt the walk and speech of a man in order to blend in so that she won't be attacked while she's on the road. She works to free women that have been taken prisoner by these men, but mostly her goal is survival. And it's a super fascinating world and a super interesting journey of this woman. It's written in like a diary format, so the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, this is her writing down her journey as she goes. I just loved it. Next is Middle West Volumes 1 and 2. This is the only graphic novel series on this list. So Middle West follows our main character whose father is abusive, and he is trying to escape after his father has a huge fit and becomes this giant storm and destroys the city they're in. So he wants to get away from him, but he's also afraid of becoming like him. So it's like the metaphor is clear. It's not subtle, but it's just like a really intense emotional journey for this boy, and it makes me sad, but also hopeful. And the art style, actually I have the second volume right here. I don't own it. It's a library book, but I haven't returned it yet. I love the art style. It's really, let's find a good big panel. Because there's this really interesting way that they contrast cool and warm colors. Like there's a scene, if you can see that. It's also, this world also has magic. It's like kind of a steampunk future world where everything is powered by this magic substance. Come on, Ethel, that's what it is. My gosh, I can't find a good big panel, but this is like a good multi-panel one. And I just love these. Next is The Abyss Surrounds Us by Emily Skrutsky. This is a young adult fantasy, well, young adult sci-fi. It's like a dystopian future where climate disaster has caused flooding in much of the world, and because of this flooding, pirates are kind of a thing again. Much of like trade and entertainment takes place on the water, and because so much water travel takes place, humans have genetically engineered these big monsters in order to protect the ships, and the trainers of these monsters are called reckoners. So our main character is training to become a reckoner, and on her first journey out, which is a cruise ship, it's supposed to be an easy job, it is attacked by pirates, and these pirates take Cass prisoner in order to raise a reckoner for them. So if they will have a reckoner in order to take down a monster in order to take down other ships. This book has monsters and pirates and lesbians. It's a female-female relationship, and it's like an enemies to lovers situation. Cass and Swift are like so intense together, and Swift is, one of the things I love about this book is Swift is like everything that you would consider the stereotypical bad boy, like aloof and ornery and crass and just kind of a dick all the time, but instead of being the bad boy, it's the bad girl, and she's just great. But this book is fascinating, the world is fascinating, the relationships between the two characters are great. Emily Skrutsky has another book coming out this year, and I can't wait to read it, but I will be super bitter if her book with a male-male relationship does better than her female-female. So if you're looking forward to that, you should go check out The Abyss Surrounds Us. All right, next is Morningstar by Pierce Brown. Technically, I reread Red Rising. I also read Golden Sun, but that's not a favorite. Only Morningstar is becoming a favorite. It's the third book in a series, so I can't really tell you what it's about, but I loved it. And it was just like non-stop action in this book. So many space battles, but also like face-to-face action. At the end of this book, towards the end of this book, it's like, this is a complete trilogy arc, so there are more books, but this completes a story. There were just so many good things happening in a row that I'm literally sitting in my car, like listening to the audiobook thinking, I should just stop now because I can feel the impending tragedy and I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to know what happens because I know it's gonna be bad. But I finished it and it was so worth it. It was so, so good. But very emotional. Super fucked me up. Crying in my car. I know I'm not the only one who's done that over a book. I mean. All right, next, The Electric Air by Victoria Lee. Technically, I read The Fever King and The Electric Air last year, but The Electric Air I liked so much more, and it is now a new favorite. The first book, let's just give an overview of the series. So this is set in a future world after an infection kind of covers the world, and people either die, or if they survive it, they come back with a magical but science-based ability. And the people with this science-based ability are, at least in our region of the country where we're set, recruited to the government, but they're also kind of discriminated against. So our main character, Gnome, is a refugee from another part of the country after magic wipes out that area, and he's dealt with a lot of discrimination, and his family is very poor, and he has a lot of, what's the word? He's worked with people in his area in order to expose the government for terrible things they're doing. So after he gets this disease and comes back with magical abilities, he's recruited by the government and is trying to find a way to change things from the inside, basically. But this series is like really excellent. It's a duology, so The Electric Air is the concluding book. And it sounds very political from that description, and it is, but it's also like it deals so much with abuse and domestic abuse and the way abusers groom their victims, and there's so much about survival and addiction and recovery, and like there are so many amazing things happening in this book, and I think Victoria Lee did it excellently. All right, we're getting there. Next is Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. This is not a surprise. It's one of my most anticipated books of the year. I love the Raven Cycle, and Ronan from the Raven Cycle is a main character in this book, but it also follows multiple new characters, and it follows this plot where we have this group of people that know from what are basically psychics that the world is going to end, and it's going to end because of dreamers. Dreamers are people who can pull things out of their dreams. So we follow multiple characters that are, let's see, how do I do this without spoiling anything? We follow a hunter who's trying to find dreamers. We follow a dream. We follow a dreamer, and we follow a non-dreamer that is caught up in all this shit. This is much more high stakes than any of Maggie's other books that I read. It's been a long time since I read Shiver or whatever that was, the werewolf one, but I reread The Raven Cycle last year, and this just feels so much more huge endgame than any of her other books. So I cannot wait to read more of this, and I'm very anxious for it. Next. Okay, I don't know exactly where I was, and I'm sorry if my camera moved a little. But I finished talking about all of these books, and then I got up only to realize my camera stopped recording after Call Down the Hawk. So back into it. Hopefully with practice, my descriptions are more concise. That's the only bright side I can think of. All right, so after Call Down the Hawk, okay, next is The Last Sun and The Hanged Man. This is book 1 and 2 in a series. I read The Last Sun for the first time last year and then reread it, and then The Hanged Man released in December. I love these books so much. The Hanged Man, I was on a street team to promote this book because I loved it so much. It's an adult fantasy, like urban fantasy, set in a world where Atlantis was real, and 70-ish years ago, humans found out about Atlantis and we waged war on them out of fear. And after the war was over and a peace treaty was signed, all of the citizens of Atlantis moved to Nantucket, which they call New Atlantis. So the series is called the Tarot Sequence, and all of the major players in the book are based on the tarot. The major arcana of tarot: Death, Sun, Hanged Man, Justice, etc., which is just super fascinating. A lot of the magic system in this is awesome because spells have to be stored in advance and carried on you at all times, so it requires like a certain level of preparation and practice. The first book in this series follows Rune St. John. Actually, the whole series will follow Rune St. John. He's the main character, and his companion, Brand, and they have like a psychic connection, which is one of my favorite tropes. Also, Brand acts as a bodyguard for Rune, another one of my favorite tropes. And Rune is the last son, the last surviving son, after his court was destroyed 20-ish years ago in an unsanctioned raid. So there's no record of who did this or who's responsible for destroying the court, but he was the only surviving member of his court. His family and everyone else was killed, and his home was destroyed. Follows Rune and Brand after they're hired to track down the missing son of Lady Justice in order to make ends meet. Now that they don't have a court or any value to this society, they take on odd jobs like this. So this follows them locating Lady Justice's son and uncovering what is like a bigger mystery underlying. This is a 9-book series, and the author has said the first trilogy is all about what Rune is hiding from the reader. The second trilogy is all about what Atlantis is hiding from Rune. And the third trilogy is yet unclear, but will be like big endgame scenario. I love these books for the characters. I love these books for the world and the magic system. I love these books for the interesting and intricate plot and plotting, and I just love these books. I'll recommend them to everybody. They're very queer. In the first book, we have gay, bi, pan, and ace characters. We have a male-male relationship, and the author has gone on record saying the books will only get more queer as time goes on. We'll have trans characters and non-binary characters, and I can't wait for these new characters to be incorporated. The first book is sadly lacking women, but the second book, we get some dope women. One is a young girl whose family used to be a part of Rune's court before it was destroyed, and another is Lady Death, and she's just like a straight up badass, and I can't wait to get more of them. The author has said, like, I'm so obsessed with these books, I like follow the author and like read everything I possibly can, all the interviews, to find out everything I can find out for future books. But like, I haven't gone so hard in a fandom in a long time. That Rune and Lady Death will have sort of a sibling relationship as time goes on, and I just can't wait to see how everything comes together. There's going to be some big reveals in book 3 that I'm just dying for and also terrified for, because I mean, there are a lot of hints dropped about like a really big like tragic secret that Rune is keeping. And at this point, after book 2, I'm very sure that this theory is correct, and it's fucking heartbreaking, honestly. But I've gone on too long about these books, all right? Favorite books. We'll just call it that. 5 stars all around. I will reread them over and over again. All right, that was it for science fiction and fantasy. Now on to contemporary and romance. Oh, first is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a young adult contemporary told in verse that is about our main character, whose name I don't remember. I read this at the beginning of the year and I'm fuzzy on the details. But it's a coming of age story where she is struggling with her expectations from her family. She feels, and because of religion mostly, that the expectations for her and the expectations for her brother are very different, and the result of not meeting those expectations is very different, and she's very resentful of that, but she loves her brother at the same time. She's trying to find something that's just for her, and it turns out to be poetry, but she knows her mom won't be cool with it, so she's keeping it a secret. And it's just such a beautifully written book, and the author narrates the audiobook herself, and that's how I listen to it, and that's what I recommend if you want to read it. All right, next, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. You probably know what this is about. It's a new adult romance. The first son of the first female president of the United States and Henry, the Prince of England, second son. And it's just a sweet contemporary romance. I love the relationships between these characters. I loved Alex's whole journey figuring out who's bi was just super relatable. And the relationships, not just between Henry and Alex, but between Alex and his sister and Henry and his sister, and the friendships that they have, they just were such a fun group dynamic, and this was just a fun, cute read. I read it twice. It's such like a good spirit-lifting book, so I'm sure I'll reread that in the future. All right, my last favorite book of 2019, Ivy Everdene's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the only middle grade on this list, and this is about our main character Ivy, whose family's home is destroyed during a tornado, and the only thing she's able to get out of the house is her journal that she writes and draws in. But during the relocation, when they find a place to live while they find a new home, her journal goes missing, and someone starts leaving pages of her drawings in her locker with notes, and she's not sure if this person is a friend or her sister or someone else, maybe someone threatening her. And it's causing her a lot of confusion and fear because this book contains drawings of her with another girl that she has a crush on. And she hasn't told anyone that she has a crush on another girl, and she knows that that's unusual, and she's afraid of anyone finding out. At the same time, she's having struggles with her family because her parents are stressed. Obviously, their house was destroyed, and she has a baby sibling that they have to take care of, and she also has an older sibling that's been pulling away, and she's not sure why. And it's just such a good story, and Ivy is so sweet, and the whole book you just want to give her a hug and tell her everything's going to be okay. It's just like a really solid book and a new favorite. And it's inspired me to read more middle grade books in 2020. All right, those are all my favorites of 2019. Let me know if any of these were on your favorites list, or if you hated them, or what some of your favorites were from 2019. Leave them in the comments. Let me know. If you like this video, hit like. I post book-related videos every Wednesday, so if you want to see more, subscribe. If you want to keep talking, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Kelsey Reads, or Goodreads at Kelsey Lynn Reads. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.